We're coming up on the Friday midnight deadline for Congress to avert a partial government shutdown. The New York Times reporting House Speaker Mike Johnson is suggesting another short-term spending bill that would kick the can down the road, so to speak, extending funding for some government agencies through March 8th, but the rest through March 22nd. This comes after top congressional leaders met with President Biden last night. But with no firm deal yet, investors have some concerns about how any shutdown could impact markets. Let's bring in Ed Mills, who's the Raymond James Washington policy analyst, to discuss more. Ed, great to see you here this morning. So help us break this down. I mean, what's the reality that we would see a government shutdown in an era where we still have, and in a time period specifically where we have Super Tuesday coming up? There's massive political implications if there's nothing that gets done.
Yeah, Brad, you highlight that we have a lot going on here in Washington, D.C. So we have that March 1st deadline, Super Tuesdays next week. We have the State of the Union on March 7th, March 8th. We got the second deadline here. So my advice would be cut a deal. Figure out, we're well into FY24. That started on October 1st. We had a deal on how much we're supposed to spend, kicking the can down the road. We're getting closer each time, but we're not yet close enough. Could we have a shutdown? Sure. My job at Raymond James is try to figuring out how that impacts the market. And what I would tell your viewers is that when we looked at every shutdown since the 90s, on average, the market has been up 3.2% during shutdowns. So they get a lot of noise. They're really important in DC. They're really important for the employees at those agencies. But the market either shrugs it off or actually surges during that time period.
The market might shrug it off. It might not be an immediate concern, maybe in terms of how that's reflected within the market. But say a deal is not reached. In terms of the blame, if the GOP shoulders the blame, and that is then obviously could potentially be a threat here to the general election coming up later this year, what does that mean for policy, and how should investors be thinking about that aspect?
So, Shayna, I do think that when we look at previous shutdowns, almost exclusively Republicans have gotten the blame because we've seen them being the leaders of saying there needs to be certain policies that go in or certain cuts to the budget before they're willing to support it. Once you shut down the government, almost no policy is developed. And so the only thing you do is reopen the government. If we are in a world where Republicans are being backed into the wall and being forced to reopen, I think that has actually pressure that builds to also do the defense supplemental that passed the Senate overwhelmingly, a vote of 70-29. And so this is a binary event in some ways for defense stocks. If you don't have a defense bill, and we could get the automatic cuts in a couple of months, which would be almost a double-digit defense cut, or in the flip side, we would see a defense supplemental pass, significant impact there. As we look forward on the election, Republicans under Speaker McCarthy wanted to show that House Republicans could govern, especially with this narrow majority. This dysfunction and the how much of Speaker Johnson's job is on the line adds to a narrative that they are not able to govern with this small majority, which on the margin gives Democrats, at least in the race for the House of Representatives, a slight margin come November.
Ed, as we're trying to kind of give investors the best playbook going into this general election season, of course, Super Tuesday, as we mentioned a moment ago, what are the key things that investors should be watching for on Super Tuesday to really set up for the general election, and what's to be expected there? What some of the primary issues that we could hear both candidates really pound the pavement on, and how that could impact portfolio strategy as well?
Yeah, Brad. So the playbook that we have historically had for election years, first and foremost, on presidential election years, they're the second best year for the market in the 4-year presidential term. But what we've seen previously is the market weak until there was a nominee. Usually that was weakness between January to March, which was Super Tuesday. One of the things that we have said this year is that the nominees seem to be a little bit more of a foregone conclusion as we started out this year. So we didn't necessarily have to wait until March to get that conclusion. What we're watching on Super Tuesday is, how does Nikki Haley fare? After Super Tuesday, Republicans go almost exclusively to a winner take all. So unless she's able to get to 50% in some of these states, she is going to get 0 delegates unless something happens with the Trump campaign. So if she's moving to the sideline, is she just dropping out, or would she be trying to get encouraged to do a third party run? No Labels does not have a candidate. They've wanted to announce this after Super Tuesday. And so we're going to see a lot of polling. How does she match up against a 3-way race between Trump and Biden? Because No Labels has not been able to get that candidate with high quality other candidates saying they're not going to run for president. So look for that as the boomlet, and that would be really interesting for the markets because there's a big difference between a Nikki Haley presidency, a Donald Trump presidency, and a Joe Biden presidency.